Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it is my privilege to be your haunted host for this episode. It's a crisp, late fall day in Long Island, New York. A newlywed couple, still basking in the afterglow of their big day, move into a cozy home with their 3 kids and dog. The house is stately, but unassuming, nestled among quiet, tree-lined streets. They bought it for a bargain price. Now, the family has space to grow and to dream of the future. Before they settle in, the matriarch invites a Catholic priest to bless the home and drive out any lingering spirits. But as he moves from room to room, sprinkling holy water, something happens. The priest suddenly flees the house, shaken and injured, convinced the residents is hiding something sinister, something far beyond his power. Soon, the whole family is experiencing unimaginable horrors. Entities crawling up the stairs and slithering down walls. Children possessed by demonic spirits. The father turning on his family and plotting murder. The story builds to a heart-pounding climax as the family flees in terror, leaving all their possessions behind. They never return. The house hums with unresolved energy, its gable windows glowing with a quiet, watchful eye. You've seen the movie, right? Or maybe you've read the book. It's the story of the Amityville Horror, one of the most famous haunted house tales ever told. The film, based on a best-selling novel, blurred the line between fact and fiction so perfectly that audience could never quite tell which was which. That was its power, and that's why it's lingered and has earned a spot in our collective nightmares. Over the years, the real-life owners of the home, George and Kathy Lutz, have been scrutinized, sometimes pitied as victims, sometimes dismissed as hoaxers, but always met with intense curiosity. The Lutzes sit at the center of this legend, both in the story itself and in its aftermath. Yet, there was another couple, far more famous and influential, who used their tenuous link to the Amityville case, and many others like it, to launch and build their iconic careers. Ed and Lorraine Warren. In today's episode, we're stepping into the complicated and controversial world of the Warrens. They're among the most famous names in modern paranormal history, and their legacy still sparks fierce debate. Were they devoted investigators of the unknown, or master storytellers who shaped belief itself? We'll uncover the lesser-known sides of their lives, trace the origins of their fame, and explore the lingering questions that surround their work. People like the Warrens, and the stories they shared, continue to feed our fascination with the unknown. As we peel back the layers, we'll see how the horror genre blurs the line between fact and fiction, until the truth itself begins to feel like a ghost. But before we get to that, something happens every October. The air shifts, the nights stretch a little longer, and even after all these years, the dark still surprises us. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet pull at dusk when the wind stirs the leaves and this world and the next feel closer than ever. Every night this October, our lanterns glow across Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. In Kingston, follow in the footsteps of the tour that started it all, the original Haunted Walk of Kingston, which, for my money, still has some of the creepiest ghost stories that we tell. In Ottawa, head into the deep, dark woods to explore the ghosts of the Mackenzie King estate in Gatineau Park. These are our final 2 weekends of tours for 2025. Don't miss out on this one-of-a-kind experience. In Toronto, our Spirits of the Distillery tour is the perfect mix of ghosts, history, and a hint of whiskey. And of course, those are only the beginning. For those who want to go further, our Alone in the Dark experiences in Ottawa and Toronto let you take part in real paranormal investigations. No tricks, no guarantees, just you, the dark, and whatever chooses to answer. This season doesn't last long, and neither do the tickets. Book your spot at hauntedwalk.com and join us on a paranormal adventure at the best time of the year. And as a listener to the podcast, you can use the promo Haunted Talks, all one word, at checkout to get 15% off most Ghost Tour tickets. We'll see you in the dark. To understand the Warren story, we need to start at the very beginning. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 1944. The United States was deep in the Second World War, and people everywhere were desperate for small moments of happiness amid the endless devastation reported on the airwaves. One night, 2 teenagers went to a local cinema, each hoping for a brief escape. By chance, they bumped into each other, and that chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would forever change the world of horror and the paranormal. The teenagers were Edward Warren Minnie and Lorraine Warren. By all accounts, they felt an instant connection. The pair had little time to truly get to know each other before Ed was shipped off to war. When he returned on leave about a year later, they quietly married in a traditional ceremony, convinced their bond was something extraordinary, perhaps even divine. Ed had been fascinated by the paranormal since childhood, while Lorraine had long explored her own professed abilities as a trance medium. They had plenty to talk about. Ed recounted strange events from his youth that left him convinced there was something beyond human understanding. Lorraine shared her experiences of spiritual connection and her claimed gift for sensing the future, all deeply rooted in her religious faith. The marriage didn't just join 2 lives, it sparked something larger. Together, they would spend the rest of their years chasing the thin line between the living and the dead. In the early years, it seemed the couple had a genuine knack for the supernatural. Ed Warren called himself a demonologist, one of the few people outside the clergy to claim such a title. Along with a deep fascination for research and observation, he said he possessed special abilities to detect and communicate with demonic forces. To hone his skills and build a reputation, Ed and Lorraine often showed up unannounced at homes, offering to conduct paranormal investigations. Shockingly, people let them in. Imagine it, a polite, unassuming couple appears at your door, asking if they can come inside to look for ghosts. Like something out of Ghostbusters, the Warrens would then use their abilities to sense malevolent entities and communicate with friendlier spirits. By most accounts, homeowners were intrigued and often grateful. Slowly, the Warrens' unusual calling began to grow into something much larger. In 1952, the Warrens established the New England Society for Psychic Research. It would grow into one of the most prominent paranormal organizations of its time, sparking public fascination for decades to come. In fact, the society still exists today and is credited with inspiring countless other ghost hunting groups across New England. The society became a gathering place for like-minded individuals from all walks of life who were drawn to study unexplained phenomena, everything from demonic possessions and spiritual auras to fortune-telling and hauntings. The Warrens quickly became the face of the group. Their personalities complemented each other perfectly. Ed was bold and outspoken, always eager to push boundaries and confront whatever stood before him, whether physical or supernatural. Lorraine was quieter, occasionally skeptical, and known for her warmth and charm. She was the one who earned people's trust. Friends and family later recalled that the couple's public persona matched their private lives. They may have been natural performers, but they weren't merely acting. For 2 decades, the New England Society for Psychic Research remained a modest operation. Its meetings held in private living rooms, its lectures drawing small crowds. Ed and Lorraine's investigations relied on persistence more than fame. They spent many evenings knocking on strangers' doors, offering to help families who believed their homes were haunted. Their timing, however, could not have been better. By the 1960s, horror itself was being reborn. The genre was exploding in books, films, and pop culture, capturing imaginations around the world. Stories of ghosts and possessions were no longer whispered. They were everywhere. Interest in the Warrens grew alongside this new wave of fascination. The cases became stranger, the media more attentive. By the early 1970s, their reputation as paranormal investigators had spread far beyond New England. And then, in 1970, they encountered the case that would make them famous. A supposedly possessed doll known as Annabelle. According to the Warrens, the ordinary Raggedy Ann doll was owned by 2 roommates. Without warning, it began to behave in unsettling ways. The woman often found the doll in different parts of their apartment, even when the doors had been locked and no one else was home. Sometimes it was discovered in impossible positions, sitting upright or standing on its floppy legs, as if supported by invisible hands. One of the women's boyfriends was especially disturbed by the doll and urged them to get rid of it. Then, one night, he awoke suddenly, realizing he couldn't move. out of the corner of his eye, he saw the doll slowly climb up the side of the bed, onto his chest, and then it began to strangle him. When he finally broke free, gasping for breath, he was left shaken and uncertain. Had it been a nightmare, or had the doll truly tried to kill him? That moment became a tipping point. The roommates hired a medium who told them the doll was possessed by the spirit of a deceased child named Annabelle. Terrified by the possibility of further incidents, they reached out to the Warrens, who had recently opened an occult museum on their property. Ed and Lorraine gladly accepted the case. They documented the roommates' experiences and conducted their own investigation. Ed, the self-proclaimed demonologist, confirmed the medium's claim the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a little girl named Annabelle. Lorraine attempted to make contact with the entity, but found she could not banish it from the object. Fearing the doll's influence, the Warrens decided to seal Annabelle inside a locked glass cabinet to prevent any future harm. They placed a sign on the case that read, "Warning, positively do not open," to serve as both a warning to visitors and a form of spiritual containment for the dangerous object inside. The eerie relic soon became the centerpiece of their growing occult museum, drawing crowds eager to glimpse the Warrens' collection of haunted and forbidden objects. It would take years for the Annabelle case to become famous, eventually inspiring the Conjuring movie series. But even in its early days, the story was well known in New England's paranormal circles and helped launch the Warrens into public life. By 1976, their reputation had grown enough they were invited to take part in a televised investigation in Amityville. You've already heard the broad outline of that story. A loving family moves into a surprisingly affordable old home with a troubled past, and soon, bizarre things begin to happen. The disturbance escalates until the family finally flees, never to return. Later investigators uncover a grim history. The house sits on an old burial ground, cursed by dark forces. It's a familiar tale, one that existed long before Amityville and continues to be retold by horror writers today. The real-life version of Amityville was investigated by the Warrens, and their work at the house helps explain its lasting infamy. The main figures, the Lutz family, were real people who bought a home in Long Island, one that had been the scene of a gruesome murder just a year earlier. The Warrens were called in months after the family fled to examine the claims of supernatural activity. Despite how the story was later portrayed in Hollywood, the Warrens never actually met the Lutzes. By the time the couple arrived, the family was gone. In March 1976, the Warrens conducted a televised seance inside the house. During that broadcast, several incidents were reported, including a photograph that appeared to show a ghostly boy peering from a doorway. Many viewers considered it some of the strongest evidence of paranormal activity ever captured. Ed claimed he was shoved and pushed by an unseen force, while Lorraine said she witnessed vivid images of the family massacre that had taken place the year before. The Amityville story soon took on a life of its own. Authors and producers seized on the tale, transforming it into books and eventually the now iconic film featuring the house with its eerie, eye-shaped windows. Although the Warrens had played only a minor role in the real investigation, they were suddenly, and somewhat inexplicably, famous. Perhaps it was their charisma, their dramatic flair during the televised seance, or simply their unwavering conviction. Whatever the reason, by the time Amityville entered the mainstream, the Warrens were no longer on the sidelines. The case became the spark their careers needed, and they weren't the only ones to benefit. The Lutz family earned millions from book and film deals. The Warrens, however, seemed less interested in quick profits. They were playing the long game, focused on steadily building their credibility and cementing their place in the world of the paranormal. If the Warrens weren't household names before, they certainly were after their next case, the Enfield Poltergeist. It became one of the most famous hauntings of all time, and one we've covered on this podcast. It inspired a familiar horror storyline that's been retold countless times, including in the Conjuring 2. The events unfolded in a quiet North London suburb, and later inspired the notorious television hoax Ghost Watch more than a decade later, a story we just recently covered. I'll put links to both of those episodes in the show notes. The Enfield case centered on two young sisters, Janet and Margaret, who claimed to be tormented and even possibly possessed by unseen forces. Investigators from around the world arrived to witness the strange activity, including members of the renowned Society for Psychical Research in the UK. When the Warrens crossed the Atlantic and knocked on the door, they were turned away. Their presence, it seemed, wasn't always as welcome as they liked to suggest. A setback like this never slowed them down. They attached themselves to the Enfield story and later claimed a central role in the investigation. When the Enfield Poltergeist became the basis for The Conjuring 2, the Warrens were suddenly placed at the center of the film. The script credited them with uncovering the case and made their characters the driving force behind the story. In reality, they had been turned away from the actual Enfield house. Yet over the years, their growing fame and influence allowed them to reshape the story, bending fact and fiction until it became something entirely their own. That was often how things went with the Warrens, the same pattern repeating again and again. The couple would arrive at an ongoing investigation and somehow manage to make themselves the focus. Before long, they were the main characters, and the story revolved entirely around them. That dynamic became the foundation for the Conjuring movie universe, the Warrens' lasting claim to fame. For anyone unfamiliar, the Conjuring franchise is the most successful and highest-grossing horror franchise of all time. The original film, The Conjuring, was a runaway success, spawning a wave of sequels and spin-offs, and unsurprisingly, at the center of it all are Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Conjuring universe has stirred endless interest in the couple. Their ties to famous cases like Annabelle and Amityville have sparked rumors and questions about their work and about who they really were. Their dramatic portrayals on screen brought a wave of new supporters, drawn in by the performances and the image of a devoted couple confronting evil together. But they've also inspired a familiar chorus of skeptics who doubt that any of these stories are real. Writers and researchers have tried to untangle the mystery, examining both the Warrens' investigations and their personal lives in search of a singular truth. But the picture that emerges is far more complex. Since the Amityville horror was released, countless attempts have been made to debunk it. The small fortune earned by the cash-strapped Lutz family after the film's success made many people suspicious. Like most so-called true Hollywood horror stories, the tale contains a few kernels of truth buried within the drama. The Amityville house is real. A brutal murder did occur there, allowing the Lutzes to buy it at a steep discount. The family did leave suddenly, abandoning most of their belongings, and the Warrens did conduct a televised seance at the home, capturing that strange photograph of the boy that still divides paranormal researchers. But nearly everything else remains in dispute. Close friends and even the Lutz's lawyer later admitted to fabricating much of the story as a money-making scheme. The lawyer famously confessed, "I know this book's a hoax. We created this horror story over many bottles of wine." Families who later moved into the home reported nothing unusual, aside from the constant flow of tourists eager to catch a glimpse of the infamous house. The film's producers later acknowledged they had taken major creative liberties, adding eerie moments for cinematic effect. But that's Hollywood after all. Audiences expect a little fiction with their fear. The Enfield Poltergeist case has also faced decades of scrutiny, with many of its claims being challenged or dismissed outright. Most investigators now believe the events were exaggerated by two attention-seeking children, and that the adults involved were misled by a series of clever pranks. It's a case that has always had me on the fence. It's possible that something unusual happened in the beginning, something the family couldn't explain, but nearly everyone agrees that the most dramatic moments, especially the alleged possessions, were the results of overactive imaginations or a carefully staged hoax designed to attract attention. Although the Warrens had little real involvement in the Amityville or Enfield cases, they were quick to capitalize on their connections to those famous stories, leading some to wonder whether they had become part of the deception themselves. In the 1970s, the Warrens weren't household names yet, but these high-profile investigations helped cement their reputation and brought in some much-needed income and credibility. Skeptics argue this makes them complicit, hoaxers by association. Defenders, on the other hand, suggest the Warrens may have been deceived as well. If they truly believed in their own abilities, it's possible they were drawn in by the very myths they helped spread. Either way, the Warrens were skilled performers who understood the value of spectacle, and they were willing to do almost anything to keep their audience's attention. The first Conjuring film is centered on the haunting of the Perron family. In the story, the Warrens visit a farmhouse plagued by a witch's curse. Lorraine makes contact with a spirit named Bathsheba Sherman, who, according to legend, sacrificed her child to the devil before taking her own life. Up to this point, the film follows the broad outline of real events. The Warrens did visit a farmhouse that was owned by the Perron family, hoping to ease what the family believed were a series of supernatural disturbances. The 5 Perron daughters described waking in the middle of the night to unseen hands tugging at them, and later discovering mysterious bruises on their body. They heard whispers in empty rooms, and at precisely 5:15 a.m. some mornings, claimed their beds were lifted from the floor. The family felt trapped in a nightmare. They had invested everything in the property and couldn't afford to leave. But the film's most memorable moments, the possession and exorcism of Carolyn Perron, are pure Hollywood. Likely many of you can still recall the film's chilling crescendo, but the real story was far quieter. The Warrens did hold a seance and reported strange occurrences, yet nothing close to the terrifying spectacle seen on the screen. The Perron case may hold the key to understanding the Warrens' legacy. A few details are confirmed. Family reported unexplained activity in their home, investigators documented their experiences, and the disturbances did seem to subside after the seance. From a paranormal investigation standpoint, it was fairly typical and ultimately successful. But that kind of story isn't quite enough for Hollywood, nor would it have made The Conjuring one of the most iconic modern horror films. Embellishments, like Caroline spewing blood as a demon takes control, makes for a far better spectacle. Those moments fill theaters, and they fulfilled the Warrens' ultimate wish: fame. Friends have said the Warrens dreamed of Hollywood and seized every chance to promote themselves. They often boasted about their small roles in well-known cases, repeating the stories to anyone who would listen. But the details of those investigations mattered less than the spotlight itself. The Warrens have always been surrounded by controversy, and questions about their true abilities have circulated in paranormal circles since the 1950s. Were their documented cases genuine encounters with the supernatural, or elaborate performances designed to bring them fame? The truth, as with most things involving the Warrens, isn't so simple. Their most famous cases seem to rest on these small kernels of truth, layered with generous embellishment. The Warrens' role was often overstated, yet they were undeniably present at many of these events. Even some skeptics, after visiting their occult museum or meeting them in person, left convinced there was something unusual, perhaps even unexplainable, about this enigmatic couple. It's easy to dismiss the Warrens as clever performers who conned their way to fame. But it's worth remembering that Ed and Lorraine were fascinated by the paranormal decades before the horror boom, and for many years they conducted investigations free of charge, apparently driven by genuine curiosity. Some believe the Warrens possessed real abilities, or at least they truly believed that they did. Their rise to prominence mirrors that of the Fox sisters, who helped ignite the spiritualist movement in the mid-19th century. The sisters claimed to be mediums who could communicate with the dead through seances. Before long, they were touring the country, performing demonstrations of ghostly communication to packed audiences. Over time, the truth emerged. Their seances were elaborate illusions. The paranormal incidents had been staged with careful choreography, sound tricks, and accomplices. Most agree the Fox sisters didn't begin as frauds. They seemed genuinely curious or connected to the supernatural, and may have had a gift for creating experiences others couldn't explain. But as their fame grew, so did audience expectations. Before long, the sisters were performing, not investigating, using their talents to entertain and draw crowds. Anyone familiar with ghost hunting knows that most investigations are quiet affairs. Long stretches pass with little activity, interrupted only by rare moments of something truly strange. Those are the moments that keep us coming back. But they're nearly impossible to reproduce on stage or on film. Add a few planned incidents, though, and the Fox sisters, and later the Warrens, could keep the show going. The Warrens often claim to gather scientific evidence of the paranormal. Their occult museum displayed items meant to support their work: photographs, recordings, and haunted objects collected over decades. Ed and Lorraine insisted their proof, along with their long list of documented cases, was irrefutable. But even some who worked with them weren't convinced. Horror writer Ray Garton, hired by the Warrens to chronicle one of their cases, grew frustrated by the family's conflicting accounts. He later told investigator Benjamin Radford, "If Lorraine told me the sun would come up tomorrow, I'd get a second opinion." The Warrens rarely used scientific methods favored by today's paranormal investigators, and much of their proof amounted to little more than, "Trust us. We know." In fact, the Warrens leaned heavily on that confidence, relying on their charisma and conviction far more than verifiable data. In 2017, a woman named Judith Penny claimed in sworn statements that she had a long-term relationship with Ed that began when she was a teenager, and that later she became pregnant. The Warren family has disputed her account, and no independent investigation has ever confirmed the allegations. Still, it's notable that contracts for the Conjuring films reportedly forbid any depiction of extramarital affairs or sexual misconduct. Whether that cause reflected Lorraine's deep religious convictions or an attempt to protect the family's image remains unclear. What is clear is that behind the Warrens' public image of faith and purpose lay a far more complex and perhaps carefully managed truth. Try as we might, it's impossible to say for certain whether Warrens were true believers caught up in the promise of fame or skilled grifters who took pleasure in the con. Few people truly knew Ed and Lorraine. In one breath, colleagues described them as kind and wholesome. Even skeptics who worked alongside them often spoke fondly of their warmth. Yet, in other accounts, particularly later in life, Ed was domineering and at times cruel. The creation of the Conjuring universe, with its sympathetic portrayals, only complicates things further. The curious, thoughtful Ed of the films stands in stark contrast to his real-life counterpart, likely another example of Lorraine's careful effort to shape the family's public image. In the end, we're left with a tangle of facts and fictions, truth and performance, an enigma the Warrens would have probably loved. There is no dispute that the Warrens helped create a cultural juggernaut. They touched some of the most famous cases of the late 20th century, and their names and the images inspired by their work still linger long after their deaths. The terrifying scenes drawn from their investigations continue to haunt our collective imagination, even as the line between truth and invention remains impossible to trace. The occult museum they founded closed to the public in 2019, after zoning officials ruled that the residential property couldn't legally operate as a tourist attraction. Yet, the collection survives. In a strange and tragic footnote to the Warrens' legacy, Dan Rivera, a longtime investigator with the New England Society for Psychic Research and frequent handler of the Annabelle doll, was found dead in his Gettysburg, Pennsylvania hotel room on July 13, 2025. One day after appearing at an event on the Devils on the Run tour. Police reported nothing suspicious, and officials confirmed that the Annabelle doll was not in the room. Weeks later, the Adams County coroner ruled his death natural and cardiac-related, citing a history of heart issues. Dan Rivera's passing drew widespread attention, given his close connection to the Warrens and their most infamous relic. For believers, the timing felt uncanny. For skeptics, it was simply coincidence. In 2025, it's been reported that comedian Matt Rife and YouTuber Elton Casti purchased the Warren home and now serve as custodians of its eerie artifacts under a multi-year agreement with the family. The Conjuring: Last Rites, released in September 2025, closes the franchise with one final case, the Smurl haunting of the 1980s in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. The Smurl family claimed their house was under attack by violent spirits. The Warrens agreed, calling the presence powerful and dangerous. Skeptics called it a hoax. That same tension between belief and doubt runs through Last Rites. The film gives Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's Warrens a fitting farewell, emotional, eerie, and caught between faith and fiction. Somewhere between record and retelling, the Warrens endure. Not quite proof, not merely fiction, but a mirror reflecting our own fascination with the unknown. The longer we study their incredible story, the more clearly we see our own beliefs and predispositions staring back at us. In the end, their greatest mystery may not be what they found, but rather our desire to believe that they did. Thank you so much for joining us. For information about any of our Halloween season ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, Ontario, please visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. And when you're purchasing your tickets, don't forget to use the promo code HauntedTalks, all one word, at checkout to get 15% off most ghost tour tickets. If you haven't already, be sure to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you listen, and we'd love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, all at Haunted Walk. As always, and especially when we're putting out episodes once a week, a very heartfelt thanks to our hard-working Haunted Talks team, including Brittany Buss, who researched and wrote this episode, and Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.